Hi, I'm Eames Keller. My parents skipped my graduation. They didn't even send a text. My father said I brought shame to the family because I chose a different path. So I stood alone on that stage, listening to applause that wasn't meant for me. A week later, my grandfather handed me the deed to a 97 million mansion. And that same night, my father called. The man who erased me. Now he needed me. What changed? The shame or the inheritance? And what if I told you? That call was only the beginning. The applause echoed across the stone walls like a storm I wasn't part of. I heard it. Loud, alive, full of names and faces I didn't belong to. The hall at Charleston School of Architecture was bright, open, high-ceilinged, meant to amplify celebration. Instead, every clap reminded me of who wasn't here. Row D, Section 4. The seats were marked Keller Family in clean black print. 3 chairs, one for my father, one for my mother, one for my older brother, Grant. Still, silent, empty. 3 chairs, 3 ghosts. That's all they sent me. I had walked across the stage like everyone else, except no one cheered when my name was called. The dean smiled politely. Someone clapped, probably out of obligation, but no one stood. No flash of a camera. No voice shouting, "That's my boy." I didn't stumble. I didn't cry, but my hands were cold. And when I looked at those chairs again, something in my chest sank, low and quiet. 1 week ago, I still had hope. It was a Tuesday. I'd driven back to the family estate, knowing full well what might come, but hoping for something different. Dad met me in his office. He always used that room when he wanted to keep things impersonal. The heavy smell of leather and cigars hadn't changed since I was 15. He didn't stand when I walked in. "You have 2 minutes," he said, looking over his glasses. "I'd like you to come to my graduation." His pen didn't stop moving. "I don't think that'll be necessary," he said, finally glancing up. "You've brought shame to this family. There's nothing to celebrate." That was his answer. Not even a pause. No acknowledgement of the years I'd spent grinding through school, paying my way with scholarships and night shifts. My mother sat in the corner of the room, near the window. She didn't say a word, just looked down at her hands. Her silence cut deeper than his words. I didn't raise my voice. I just said, "Fine, I'll graduate alone then." And I did. Standing in line with my classmates, I listened to the cheers of their families, mothers crying, fathers whistling, little siblings waving banners. I kept my smile straight, but it didn't reach anything under my skin. A girl beside me, Maya, leaned over and asked, "Where's your family?" "They're busy," I said, busy pretending I don't exist. When the dean called my name, Eames Keller, Master of Architecture, I stepped forward. My shoes clicked louder than the applause. Or maybe it just felt that way. I took the diploma with a thank you nod, then walked down the stairs, eyes catching those empty chairs again. I guess I was never the right kind of Keller. Outside, the sky was grayer than it had any right to be. Spring in Charleston was usually all sunshine and pollen, but today the clouds hung low and heavy, like the air knew what had happened. I stood near the edge of the crowd. Some kids were taking photos with parents. Others kissed partners, hugged siblings. I held my rolled-up diploma like it was just another paper to file away. No one waited for me. No flowers. No congratulations. My phone buzzed. For a second, my heart betrayed me. I thought maybe it was my mom. But no, it was a notification. My brother Grant had posted a picture on Instagram, him in a tux, holding a champagne flute, standing with Dad in front of the company logo. The caption read, "Proud to represent the Keller legacy tonight." Legacy. That word again, like I'd thrown mine in the trash because I chose architecture over cement and contracts. I stared at the screen, thumb frozen, then laughed, quiet, bitter, dry. They had a seat. They just chose not to fill it. I walked back toward the auditorium, not sure why. Maybe I needed to see the chairs one last time. Staff were folding them up, stacking them with others. A man in a maintenance vest asked me, "These reserved ones, should I put them away?" "Yeah," I said, barely above a whisper. "No one's coming." He nodded and moved on. The chairs vanished into a rolling cart. I didn't cry, but I felt something, like a thread finally snapped inside. Not anger, just a kind of silence that settles in your bones. By nightfall, I was back in my apartment. Small place, 2 rooms, one too quiet. I placed the diploma on my kitchen table next to 3 graduation invitations, one for each person who didn't show up. Still sealed, still useless. I didn't turn on the TV, didn't open a beer, I just sat. Then my phone buzzed again. Voicemail. "Eames, this is your grandfather, Walter. I know it's late, but I want you to know something. Your father may have forgotten what family means, but I haven't. Expect me soon, son. I'm proud of you." That voice, gravel and honey. I hadn't heard it in years. I looked at the diploma, then at the 3 envelopes, then at the window. Maybe someone did see me after all. And just like that, the one person I thought had forgotten me came back. The rumble of that old Buick engine cut through the silence of my street like it belonged to another era. I stood at the window, still holding the voicemail in my mind like it might evaporate if I moved too fast. Then the headlights went off, and the engine died with a sigh. I stepped outside. The night air carried the smell of salt from the harbor, mixed with faint jasmine drifting from the neighbor's fence. It was still warm, but a breeze stirred the trees enough to rustle leaves across the sidewalk. He stepped out slowly. Tall, thinner than I remembered, but still upright, cane in hand, hat tilted slightly back, like a man who never quite left the 1960s behind. His gaze met mine without blinking. No pity, no performance. "You didn't think I'd miss your graduation, did you?" His voice had the same rhythm as the message, gravel and warmth, held together by something deeper, conviction. I half laughed, stepping toward him. "You're about a week late," he shrugged. "Perfection takes time, boy." We didn't hug. We didn't have to. He just stared at me a few seconds longer, then looked past me into the apartment behind. "You got tea?" That was his way of saying he wanted to come in. I stepped aside and held the door open. Nothing fancy, just the store brand kind. That's the only kind worth drinking. Inside, I cleared the table while he eased himself into the old wooden chair across from mine. The cushions creaked. I filled 2 mugs, skipped the sugar. He sipped his slowly, eyes never leaving me. "Did your father show up?" The question landed heavy. I didn't flinch. "No," he said. I embarrassed him. Walter exhaled, slow and deliberate. He set his mug down. "Funny. He said the same thing to me once." I blinked. He did. Right after I refused to let some corporate investors buy out the family name. He leaned back, tapping his cane against the floor lightly. Said I was holding us back. Said I didn't understand the times. I hadn't expected that. All my life, Walter had been the man people spoke of in past tense. He was the antique behind the empire, the old man whose name was still etched into the company letterhead, but whose opinion was never requested anymore. He kept talking. Back then, Richard thought expansion was everything. He didn't care who he stepped on, or what kind of deals he signed. He still doesn't, I muttered. Walter's brow lifted slightly. You think he's cruel now, son? You should have seen him when he was young and had something to prove. I glanced down at the kitchen counter where the 3 untouched graduation invitations still sat. I couldn't tell if I was angry or just tired of being disappointed. Then Walter reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a manila envelope. He laid it on the table like it weighed 100 pounds. I need you to open this, he said. I hesitated, but peeled it open. Inside was a legal-sized document, crisp and official. I read the title line twice before my brain caught up. Deed of transfer, Bramfield Estate. Recipient, Eames Keller. My hands went cold. What is this? A gift. And a correction, he said. That house is yours now. Has been for 2 weeks. My mouth moved, but no words came out. Finally, I said, Grandpa, I don't want money. This isn't about money, he said, his voice gentler now. It's about legacy, the kind that doesn't need their approval, the kind that tells you, you're enough. I gripped the paper, still trying to process the number written in the corner, 97 million. A mansion I didn't even know still existed, much less belonged to me. Walter leaned forward. Richard's been using my name to sign off on deals I never agreed to. Real estate acquisitions, offshore contracts, the works. I only found out when one of my old friends at the bank called, asking about my signature on a Dubai file. That hit me like a slap. I remembered Dad saying things like, your grandfather's old-fashioned. He signs what I tell him to. It had always sounded like a joke. Now it felt more like theft. He forged your signature? I asked. Walter nodded. He didn't just erase me from the company. He used me to build the illusion that I was still on board. My stomach churned. It was like looking into a mirror, different man, same betrayal. We sat in silence for a long moment. I could hear the ticking of the kitchen clock. Then Walter stood and pointed at the blank wall near the hallway. You ought to hang something there. I followed his gaze. Like what? A chair, he said with a half smile. Just one, so you never forget that someone always had your back. He didn't need to say more. I saw it clearly. The 3 empty chairs at my graduation, but this time, one wasn't empty. We finished our tea quietly. Walter rose slowly, adjusted his coat, and moved toward the door. I walked him outside. Before getting into the car, he turned and looked me straight in the eye. One day, your father will call, not to apologize, but because he'll need you. When that happens, don't pick up right away. Let him wait. He climbed into the car without another word. I stood there for a while, deed in hand. Porch light flickering above me like it refused to give in to the dark. A week later, the phone rang, and it was him. Dad's voice was calm, but calm is how storms begin. The phone kept ringing, slicing through the quiet morning. I watched it light up on the counter, the name R. Keller glowing like a warning. Walter's words echoed in my head. Don't answer right away. Make him wait. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Then I picked it up. Eames. His tone was steady, too steady, like a man rehearsing empathy. I heard your grandfather stop by. He did. A pause. Then the temperature in his voice dropped a degree. And he gave you something that belongs to the family. No, Dad, I said, keeping my tone even. He gave me something you never could. Respect. He ignored that. Of course he did. Be reasonable, son. You're not equipped to manage an estate like that. Those properties require oversight, maintenance, taxation. Let's discuss the terms. There it was. The mask slipped. This wasn't a conversation, it was a transaction. I pictured him leaning back in his leather chair, looking at spreadsheets, not people. If it's about the deed, I said, we'll settle it in person. His reply came sharp, quick, like the snap of a briefcase latch. Good. There's a board meeting next Thursday. Come to Atlanta. We'll have a family discussion. Fine. Eames, he added, voice softening just enough to sound human. Your grandfather won't live forever. Be smart about which side you stand on. I didn't respond. I just hung up and stared at the wall until the silence felt heavier than the call itself. A week later, I drove north. The miles between Charleston and Atlanta rolled by like an old wound reopening. By the time I reached the city limits, the skyline looked sterile, a forest of glass and steel. Keller Group's tower rose higher than the rest, its mirrored surface reflecting the sky like it owned it. Walking through those doors felt like stepping into a world I deliberately left behind. Everything was polished, marble floors, chrome railings, the faint smell of money and control. The receptionist smiled when she saw my badge. E. Keller? She asked. Are you here for an interview? I smiled faintly. Something like that. Inside the elevator, I caught my reflection. Same suit, different man. Not the son they expected. When the doors opened, I saw them already waiting. Dad sat at the head of the long conference table, posture perfect, expression unreadable. Grant was beside him, smirking like a man who'd already won. Their attorney, Mr. Delaney, shuffled papers quietly, the kind of silence that served power. Grant spoke first. So, the prodigal son finally brings his diploma to the big table. Nice to see you too, I said, taking a seat opposite them. Dad didn't waste time. He slid a stack of documents across the table. Transfer the deed back to the Keller Trust. You'll save yourself a lifetime of headaches. I can have the paperwork filed by tomorrow. I glanced at the top page. It bore Walter's signature, neat, confident, unmistakable. My stomach clenched. You forged this. Dad's expression didn't flicker. I protected the family's name. That's what leaders do. Leaders. That word made my jaw tighten. He said it like a confession disguised as virtue. You built a company on my grandfather's integrity, and then you signed his name behind his back, I said quietly. You wouldn't understand, he replied. This is business, not emotion. You can't run a legacy on sentiment. Grant chuckled. He thinks he's got principles. That's cute. I didn't rise to it. I kept my tone level. You're right, Dad. I don't understand how you can lie to your father's face and still sleep at night. He leaned forward. Careful, Eames. Don't forget who made your name mean something. That was it. The flicker of arrogance that told me everything. He didn't want reconciliation. He wanted ownership. I folded the papers neatly, slid them back to him. You taught me one thing. Never sign something you don't believe in. Grant laughed. There he goes, walking away again. That's what you do best, right? Leave. I stopped at the doorway, turned just enough to meet his eyes. No, this time I'm walking towards something. The room stayed silent long after I left. Downstairs, the lobby light felt softer, freer somehow. I stepped outside and saw Walter's car parked at the curb. He was in the driver's seat, hat low, eyes steady. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. I slid into the passenger seat, laid the forged papers on the dashboard. Did you tell him? He asked after a while. No, I said. I showed him. Walter smiled faintly, eyes on the road. Good. The truth sounds better when they have to see it. As we drove out of the city, the neon lights faded behind us. We passed a massive billboard, Dad's face plastered across it, grinning beside the slogan, "Building the Future." I looked up at it and said, half to myself, maybe it's time someone rewrote that slogan. Walter didn't answer, but I caught the corner of his mouth lifting, the kind of smile that said finally. Then his phone buzzed. He frowned, pulling it from his pocket. The screen lit up with a message. I saw just enough to read it. We need to talk. It's urgent. About the will. The hum of the tires filled the silence between us. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I knew. The storm hadn't passed. It was just finding its next battlefield. That message changed everything. Walter read it once, didn't say a word, then placed his phone face down on the console between us. Outside the windshield, the streetlights passed in blurred intervals as we rolled through a quiet Charleston neighborhood. "What's that about?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he tapped the edge of his cane against the floorboard twice, like he was gathering his thoughts. "When people smell inheritance," he finally said, "they stop acting like family. Start acting like wolves." I waited, knowing he wasn't done. "That will they think they saw? The one Richard and Grant brag about in boardrooms and cocktail lounges? That's not the final one. Not even close." My brow furrowed. "Then what is?" "There's another," he said, quieter now. "It's sealed, official, and it names you. But I'm starting to suspect someone's trying to get to it before I'm gone." We didn't speak for the next hour. Just the hum of tires and the ticking of Walter's old watch filled the silence. Somewhere between Charleston and Savannah, I realized, this wasn't about pride anymore. This was about preserving truth before it was erased. When we arrived in Savannah, it was near dusk. Judith Morrow's law office sat on a shaded street just outside the historic district, a converted townhouse with ivy climbing the brick. She greeted us at the door, white-haired, sharp-eyed, and no nonsense in her gray wool blazer. "Walter," she said, "I thought you'd call sooner." Walter offered a small smile. Didn't want to believe it till I had to. Inside, we sat in her study, lined with books and smelling faintly of old wood and coffee. Judith wasted no time. "Someone accessed your records," she said, "both digital and paper. They knew what they were looking for. It wasn't random." "When?" Walter asked. "Last Thursday. Same day Richard was in town." I looked to Walter, but he was already nodding, like he'd expected it. Then Judith paused, eyes softer now. "And Walter, your last test results." "I know," he said, cutting her off. "We don't need to go over it again." I turned to him. "What's she talking about?" He met my gaze, steady. "My health's declining, Eames. Faster than I told you. Faster than I told anyone." The weight in that room shifted. It settled into my chest like a brick. "If they get to the will before I'm gone," he said, "they'll rewrite history. Again. I won't let that happen." That night, after Judith left to check the vault herself, Walter and I sat by the fireplace, each with a cup of lukewarm tea. The flames danced shadows across the bookshelves. "I was hard on your father," Walter said suddenly. "More than I should have been. Too much business, not enough being a dad." "You're saying you made him this way?" "I'm saying he didn't become that man in a vacuum." Silence stretched between us. "So now you're trying to fix it through me?" "No," he replied. "I'm trying to fix it with you." And in that moment, it wasn't about estates or signatures. It was about breaking a cycle. The next morning, the headlines hit like a slap. Walter was declared mentally unfit to conduct business in a public statement by Keller Group's legal team. An injunction had been filed in Atlanta, aiming to nullify his authority over any legal or financial documents signed in the last 6 months. I stared at the press release on my phone, hands numb. "He called you incompetent," I said. Walter was silent, looking out the window. "When pride replaces love," he finally said, voice almost inaudible. "Even sons forget what blood means." Outside Judith's office, I paced back and forth, fists clenched, phone still in hand. She tried to stop me. "Eames, wait. You can't respond emotionally. They want you to panic. If you move now, you'll look unstable." "Proof?" I snapped. I was proof the day he left me sitting alone on that stage. Judith lowered her voice. "You want this to stick? Then we do it the right way. Slow and smart." Walter came up behind me. He didn't say much, just placed a hand on my shoulder. "You don't win wars in the heat, son. You win them in silence." I closed my eyes and nodded. That night, the sky over Savannah cracked with thunder. Rain swept in from the coast. I walked out to the porch and found a single chair under the awning, damp from the spray. I wiped it off and sat down. Inside, I could hear Walter coughing, a deep, rattling sound that scared me more than anything Richard ever could. I looked out into the storm and whispered, "He's not taking this from you. Not again." And I meant it. By the time the sun rose, the air smelled of wet earth and salt. I opened my phone and stared at the screen. My name was trending. Not Walter's, mine. The headlines didn't ask for permission. They were already there when I opened my eyes, bright, loud, everywhere. My phone vibrated until it slid off the nightstand and onto the carpet. I reached for it, barely awake, and saw my name next to words I couldn't believe. Walter Keller's grandson accused of coercion. Ailing magnate's will under suspicion. Is Eames Keller after his grandfather's fortune? I blinked once, then again. It didn't change. Apparently, I was now suing the only man who ever showed up for me. That's what they were saying. That I had manipulated him. That I was a threat. That I'd taken advantage of an old man on his deathbed. A photo of me from graduation, alone, holding my diploma under gray skies, was now being used as evidence of ambition gone wrong. The buzz didn't stop. Texts from numbers I hadn't seen in years, college classmates, people I barely knew, old acquaintances pretending they always knew I'd do something big. I didn't respond. I just stared at my reflection in the motel bathroom mirror. My eyes looked older, not tired, worn, and under it all, disbelief, not at the lie, at how fast people were ready to believe it. Back at the house in Savannah, Walter had already seen the news. He didn't say anything when I walked in, but I found the newspaper shoved between the couch cushions, crumpled, like he couldn't bear to look at it, but couldn't throw it away either. "They've declared war," I said. Walter, without looking up, replied, "Then we'll fight like builders, brick by brick." But his words faltered halfway through. I heard the break in his breath before I saw it. He gripped his chest, just for a second, but long enough for the color to drain from his face. "Grandpa?" Judith ran in from the hallway, already on the phone with the hospital. I froze. The world around me shrank to the space between his fingertips and the armrest. This man, who had stood taller than any storm my family ever hurled at me, now looked fragile, too quiet, like he was shrinking inside his own body. In the emergency room, he kept saying he was fine, but I saw the nurse's expression. I knew better. Outside the hospital, I watched the live stream from Keller Group's headquarters. A podium. Lights. My father. Richard adjusted his tie with that same rehearsed dignity he used in every boardroom and family photo. My son, he said calmly, has been under tremendous pressure, and sometimes ambition clouds judgment, but we're doing everything to protect my father's well-being. The cameras loved him. That practiced voice, the pained concern, all of it staged for sympathy he never earned. I said out loud to no one, "He never came for me, but he's here for my inheritance." Later that night, I sat beside Walter's hospital bed. Tubes ran across his chest, machines beeped in slow rhythm. A nurse stepped in, offered a warm smile, and said softly, "Your grandfather talks about you every day. Said you'd save the family's soul, not its money." She nodded to the visitor's chair beside the bed. Same design, same shape. The one that kept showing up everywhere I went. "You should sit," she said. "He always said that chair wasn't just for visitors, it was for allies." I sat. I didn't say anything at first, just looked at him, at the man who gave me more in silence than most people did in speeches. "Guess this seat's never really been empty, huh?" I whispered. His hand twitched slightly. I think he heard me. The next morning, Judith handed me a brown folder. "These were meant for you," she said. "Walter had them prepped in case something like this happened." Inside were recordings, audio from boardroom meetings, snippets of conversations. In one of them, clear as day, was my father's voice. "I don't care if we have to sign it for him. Just make sure the paperwork clears. The old man's a liability now." It hit like cold water. There it was, the truth. But it wasn't enough. "Where's the will?" I asked. Judith shook her head. "That piece is missing. He said you'd know where to look." That didn't help. Not until I remembered something Walter used to say when I was a kid, building model houses on the kitchen table. "When you can't build with your hands, build with your words." Suddenly, I knew. I booked the first flight back to Charleston. Once home, I dug through storage boxes until I found the old notebook from college, my thesis project, Legacy House. It was filled with sketches, floor plans, and scribbled thoughts about architecture as memory. Tucked in the back cover was an inscription. "Truth doesn't need applause, just a foundation." Beneath that, taped behind a cardboard flap, was a flash drive. I plugged it in. There he was, Walter, on video, looking straight into the camera. "My name is Walter Charles Keller, and this is my will. It is legally notarized and unaltered. My heir is Eames Richard Keller, not for his name, but for his integrity." I sat there for a long time, not smiling, not crying, just breathing. "You built walls, Dad," I whispered. "I'll build evidence." That night, I uploaded a private video to my archive. A calm one, no dramatics, just me and the facts. I didn't release it yet, but I ended it with one sentence. "Let's see how proud the Kellers are when truth has the microphone." As I closed the laptop, a new email pinged into my inbox. No sender name. Subject line: "If you release that file, you'll destroy everything." The message sat in my inbox like a loaded gun with no prints, no sender name, no sign-off, but the wording, clipped, cold, too precise, carried the familiar chill of someone who learned to lie before they learned to love. I didn't have to guess twice. Grant. I stared at the screen. The cursor blinked back like it was daring me to blink first. "Destroy everything?" I whispered to myself. "That's what they've been doing my whole life." I typed 2 words in reply. "You first." Then I hit delete. It felt like cutting a thread that had held my silence together all these years. No more waiting. No more second chances for people who treated blood like leverage. I grabbed my coat, slipped the flash drive into my inside pocket, and got in the car. It was time to go back to the place I'd spent a decade avoiding, the Keller Mansion. The drive up through the Georgia pines toward Atlanta felt longer than usual. Maybe it was the weight in my chest, or the sound of Walter's voice still echoing in my head. Truth doesn't need applause, just a foundation. The estate loomed at the end of the winding driveway like a castle that never figured out how to feel like home. As a kid, I used to call it too big for love. Nothing's changed. Inside, the silence was different, not peaceful, heavy, like it knew what I came here to do. I went straight to Walter's study. The smell of leather and old books hadn't faded. Neither had the secrets. Behind the grandfather clock was the safe. I'd seen Walter open it once, when I was barely tall enough to see the dial. He'd said the code out loud, thinking I wasn't listening. I was. It clicked open. Inside were a few bound ledgers, a stack of letters, and one small velvet box. I skipped that for now. The ledgers were older, handwritten in parts, mixed with printed spreadsheets. I opened the largest one and froze. Names, accounts, transfers, but not just Richard's. Mine. Transactions had been routed through offshore accounts labeled E. Keller Holdings. According to these records, I was already complicit in laundering hundreds of thousands, maybe millions. My father hadn't just erased me. He'd made me his cover story. He didn't just take my future, I muttered. He made me his shield. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, steady, deliberate. I didn't turn around. You shouldn't be here, son. Richard's voice, smooth as always, soaked in faux concern. I didn't look up from the ledger. Neither should you, but you always find a way in, don't you? He stepped into the doorway, hands in his pockets like a man who still believed he owned the world. You could have had everything, Eames. All you had to do was stay quiet. I stood and faced him. I've been quiet my entire life, and it got me erased. His mouth twitched. Maybe annoyance, maybe surprise. It didn't matter. Behind him, another pair of shoes creaked on the wood. I already knew who it was. Grant, holding a phone. Subtle red light blinking. He tried to look casual, leaning against the doorframe. You're recording this, right? I asked him directly. Grant's mouth opened, then closed. I turned to the blinking mic, raised my voice just enough to be sure it'd pick up. Then make sure this part's clear. Dad forged the trust. I have proof. And when I release it, you'll both learn what truth really costs. Richard's face twisted, and before I could move, he lunged, grabbed my collar. For a second, it wasn't boardrooms and press conferences anymore. It was just a man unmasked. The sudden weight knocked me into the side table. A framed photo fell. Walter's portrait. The glass shattered across the floor. We both froze. His grip loosened. He looked down at the broken picture of the man who'd built everything he now wanted to rewrite. No one spoke. That sound, glass cracking, it was louder than any of us expected. Grant stepped back. Richard walked out without another word. I knelt, picked up a shard, careful not to cut myself. The corner of Walter's face stared back at me, fractured. Maybe the truth won't save me, I murmured, but it'll bury you. It was already past midnight when I returned to Charleston. The storm had rolled in, same as the night Walter collapsed. Lightning painted the walls of my apartment like flashes of memory. I sat at the desk, plugged in the flash drive, opened the folder. Walter's face flickered on screen. I hovered over the upload button, not to social media, but to a secure server I'd set for release in 72 hours. No turning back. If I disappear before then, I whispered, the truth won't. I closed the laptop, shut off the lights. Outside the window, a small red flash blinked once. A drone camera. Recording. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of them. But maybe I should have been. I didn't sleep much that night. Something about the drone flash outside my window had settled deep into my chest, like a warning shot I wasn't meant to see. By morning, I hadn't moved from the chair. The laptop sat closed, the upload timer still ticking down in my head. Then my phone lit up. 12 missed calls, 1 voicemail. I pressed play. Eames, I'm so sorry. Walter's gone. Judith's voice cracked somewhere between breath and silence. That was all. I didn't cry, didn't scream. Just sat there, breathing like I was trying to inhale stone. They said Walter Keller died peacefully in his sleep. But peace had nothing to do with it. Walter was stable, alert, prepared. And yet, now he was gone, conveniently, just as his truth was about to surface. Just as the empire he built, the one his sons warped and poisoned, was about to face its reckoning. It didn't feel like death. It felt like timing. The funeral was held the next day, back at the Keller estate. No delay, no questions. Just an expensive, orchestrated farewell dressed in black silk and empty platitudes. I didn't walk through the front. I slipped in through the side door, the one the caterers used. Inside, it felt more like a press event than a memorial. Giant floral arrangements, men in tailored suits shaking hands, women whispering behind veils they didn't bother to wet with tears. Walter's photo was propped on an easel, framed in silver. No smile. Just that same quiet strength in his eyes. Richard stood at the front, giving a eulogy that sounded like a sales pitch. My father built a legacy, not just of brick and steel, but of vision. He was a pillar, a leader, and above all, a man of principle. I stayed in the back row where shadows clung to the walls like secrets. Nobody noticed me. Not until Richard said, he believed in family, in unity, even when tested. That's when Grant looked straight at me. On his wrist was Walter's watch, the old one with the leather strap worn soft from years of wear. He didn't earn that. He took it. And Walter never gave anything away lightly. After the service, I cornered Richard near the study. You cremated him, I said. No autopsy, no second opinions. He didn't flinch. He wanted it that way. That's not what he told Judith. His jaw tightened. Don't question a man's last wish, Eames. But later, Judith pulled me aside near the greenhouse, her voice low and careful. He left instructions, she said. Burial, under the oak tree behind the old chapel. It's written in my files. I looked at her. She didn't blink. They burned him to ashes to bury the truth with him. That night, long after the last car had pulled away and the estate returned to silence, I slipped back into Walter's office. I needed to feel him somewhere. In this room, in the books, in the air. I lit a small candle on his desk, the flame catching the reflection of the brass pen he always carried. I set it beside the flame. You taught me how to build, I whispered, to make things that last. I'll make sure your truth does. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A faint shift in color behind the bookshelf. I leaned in. The antique legal tomes were all original, except one. Its spine was slightly newer, cleaner. I pulled it. The entire section of the shelf clicked forward. Behind it, a sealed envelope. My name, written in Walter's handwriting. Inside was a single note. If you're reading this, it means they got to me first. The truth is already in motion. Trust the house. Trust the house. It wasn't metaphor. It was a direction. He meant Legacy House, the final architecture project I designed in college, inspired by him, a model of what a real home could feel like. Walter must have hidden something inside it. Back in Charleston, I dug through my storage unit until I found the old wooden box wrapped in canvas. My final year model was still intact. The tiny shutters, the hand-cut roofing tiles, even the miniature staircase I'd carved late one night after finals. I ran my fingers along the interior walls until I heard a faint tap. One panel came loose. Inside, a capsule, a key, and a USB. The key was engraved LH7. The USB loaded instantly. Walter's face appeared, his eyes direct, voice steady. If you're seeing this, Eames, then I didn't get to say goodbye. But know this, your father's empire is built on stolen trust, yours included. But truth has its own inheritance. He paused. I could see the weight in his expression. The documents are in Locker 7 Legacy Harbor Bank. Don't trust anyone, not even family. I stared at the screen until it went dark. Then I packed a bag, grabbed the key, and drove through the night. The sun was just rising when I pulled into Legacy Harbor's parking lot. The sky was orange, streaked with purple. In the corner of the lot, a black Lincoln. I recognized the man behind the wheel, my father's driver. I exhaled slowly. They knew, of course they did. But I walked in anyway. Locker 7 was where Walter said it'd be. The key slid in smooth. Inside the safety deposit box, a sealed binder, 3 flash drives, and a notarized envelope. I opened the envelope first. Inside was a full confession. Walter's written testimony of financial fraud, offshore laundering, false signatures, Richard's signature on every false document, Grant's complicity in recording calls to frame me, every lie, every stolen dollar, all on paper. I didn't move, just stood there in the stillness of the vault, holding the truth like a torch in a cave. You didn't just leave me a house, I whispered. You left me the war. And now, it was mine to finish. I stepped out of the bank with the binder under one arm, walked straight past Richard's driver, and stopped just long enough to say, "Tell him I found my inheritance." That evening, as I crossed the bridge back toward Charleston, my phone buzzed. A breaking news alert flashed on the screen. Keller estate damaged in fire, under investigation. They called it electrical, but I didn't need a report to know the truth. Richard was burning Walter's memory one brick at a time, trying to erase the last of what he couldn't control. I gripped the wheel tighter. He burned the house, I said aloud, but not the truth. They thought they burned the evidence, I murmured, eyes fixed on the news. They didn't realize I'd already inherited it. The fire at Keller Mansion was everywhere. TV, radio, social media feeds that hadn't mentioned the Keller name in years. Now they lit up like a Christmas tree draped in gasoline. One channel showed an aerial view. The estate's grand silhouette now reduced to blackened bones, charred columns, smoke curling through broken beams like a sermon delivered too late. The headline read, "Historic Keller Mansion Destroyed in Overnight Blaze." I sat in the dark, curtains drawn, only the light of the screen flickering across my face. The phone on the table vibrated nonstop. Calls, texts, emails, all from people who never returned them before. Journalists, lawyers, even cousins I hadn't spoken to since I was 15. But I didn't respond. Not yet. I reached into my bag and pulled out the USB from Legacy Harbor Bank. Walter's last war. Plugging it into my laptop, I watched his face fill the screen again, his voice calm, deliberate. Alongside it, scans of ledgers, video clips of meetings behind closed doors, spreadsheets with forged payments, even transcripts of boardroom whispers turned into weapons. I spent hours piecing it together, not editing, just organizing. A single unbroken narrative, a digital testimony. At the top, I added a simple title, The Truth About the Keller Empire. My finger hovered over the upload button. I caught a glimpse of myself in the monitor, pale, hollow-eyed, older than I was last week, maybe older than my father looked at my age. My hand shook just slightly. Once this goes live, I whispered, there's no coming back. No family, no forgiveness, no illusion left to protect. I clicked. And then, silence. The upload completed. The link went live. At first, nothing. Then a comment. Then 2. Then 1,000. Within 20 minutes, the video was being shared by people who couldn't pronounce our last name a week ago. But they listened. Something the family never did. By mid-afternoon, Keller Group's PR team was in full scramble mode. A statement appeared on their website. We strongly refute these false allegations and are working with legal counsel to ensure our founder's legacy remains untarnished. Hours later, Richard stood before a wall of microphones in Atlanta. My son is confused, he said, voice steady, tie perfectly knotted, manipulated. I blame the pressure he's been under since my father passed. This is not a scandal. This is a family in pain. He paused. Let the silence imply his own restraint. But it didn't work. Employees started stepping forward. Emails surfaced. A mid-level executive leaked internal audits showing discrepancies that matched the spreadsheets I'd posted. The empire wasn't just under fire, it was collapsing from within. That night, I received an anonymous email. Just a link. Curious, I clicked. It was a private recording, grainy, audio a little distorted. The voices were unmistakable. Walter, you're making the same mistake again, Richard. Power without conscience burns the house down. Richard, then I'll build another. There it was, the final match. The internet devoured it. Networks played the clip on repeat. Journalists dissected every line. Even news anchors who once toasted champagne at Keller Foundation galas now called for investigations. He burned the mansion to protect himself, I said to the empty room. But now the whole country can see who really struck the match. Over the next 48 hours, the unraveling accelerated. Keller Group stock plummeted. Board members resigned. The SEC announced a formal investigation. Grant disappeared. His office wiped clean. Personal accounts frozen. Then came the call. Blocked number. I answered anyway. Richard's voice, not arrogant, not composed, just raw. Eames, listen to me. They're taking everything. Silence hung between us. He continued, barely above a whisper. Do you understand what you've done? I let that question settle, then answered calm and clean. Yes, I finished the job. A pause, then he said, You were supposed to carry my name. I stared at the wall. I did, right to its funeral. Click. 2 days later, I stood on what remained of the Keller mansion. Ash crunched underfoot. The marble foundation still stood, cracked but defiant. I took off my shoes and stepped onto the cold stone barefoot. The wind blew soot across the ruins like confetti from a party no one wanted to attend. It's strange, I said softly. Destruction finally made this place honest. From my coat pocket, I pulled Walter's old pen, the one he used to sign every letter, every drawing, every dream. I knelt, pushed it into the scorched earth where the fireplace once stood. You said truth has its own inheritance, I whispered. You were right. Weeks passed. The flames of media coverage slowed, but the damage was done. Richard was indicted on charges ranging from wire fraud to conspiracy. The trial would come later. This part was just the beginning. That morning, I stood across the street from the courthouse. A swarm of reporters crowded the steps. Then the door opened. Richard emerged, flanked by lawyers, wrists in cuffs. He looked older, smaller, like the structure inside him had caved. For a moment, he looked around, as if searching for something solid. His eyes landed on me. We stared at each other across the divide of consequence and choice. No glares, no raised voices, just the final, quiet understanding between two men who shared blood and broke it differently. I turned away. "He taught me to build," I said to no one in particular. "He just never thought I'd build something stronger than him." I turned away from the courthouse, the noise behind me thinning with every step. That moment, Richard in cuffs, eyes empty, should have felt like victory. Instead, it landed like dust, quiet, hollow. After you burn your past down, the silence that follows is the loudest thing you'll ever hear. Months passed. The trials faded from the headlines. Reporters moved on. Investors pulled out. The Keller name was no longer whispered with awe, just caution. And me? I left Charleston behind. Legacy Harbor was an unfinished dream my grandfather once showed me on a yellowed blueprint. A patch of coastal land he called a clean canvas. That's where I went. No marble mansions, no headlines, just the ocean and room to breathe. I bought the land outright, not with Keller money, but with the settlement Walter had shielded, tucked away under another name decades ago. He left it untouched. I used every cent. At the groundbreaking ceremony, I stood alone in front of a simple wooden sign, the Legacy Institute, Ethics in Design, Construction, and Leadership. There were no flower arrangements, no PR team, no family leaning in for staged photos. Just me, wearing the same tie from my college graduation, the one I stood in alone. A reporter asked if I'd be reclaiming the Keller name. I smiled. "Some names aren't meant to last," I said, "but their lessons are." It was the first time I'd spoken about the family in public since the trial. It felt less like revenge, more like release. Weeks passed. Construction moved slowly, deliberately. No glass towers or steel bravado. We built with reclaimed wood, open designs, space that breathed. Then, one evening, as the sun dipped behind the cranes, I found a letter in my mailbox. No return address, but I knew that handwriting. Richard. I stood there on the porch for a long while, envelope in hand, thumb tracing the edge. I didn't want to open it, but I also knew I would. Inside was a single page. "Eames, you were right. I built everything but a son who could love me. I thought legacy meant control. You showed me it meant surrender. If you ever build again, don't build walls. Build windows." Dad. I read it twice. My throat tightened, but not from pain. It didn't sting the way it used to. It just existed. I took the letter inside, pulled down the old diploma frame that had hung empty since graduation. I replaced the blank slot with that note. For the first time, I felt like it belonged there. On the edge of the Legacy Institute's atrium, I placed a single bronze chair facing the ocean. No ropes around it. No sign telling visitors what it meant. Just a small plaque, for the ones who never got their applause. Some days, students sat in it with their lunch. Other times, staff took calls there. Most passed it without a second glance. But I knew. That chair echoed every seat left empty for me. At my graduation, at the hospital, at every dinner table I was pushed away from. And this time, the seat wasn't empty. Each morning, I'd walk out there with coffee in hand and whisper, "This one's for you, Walter." Someone once asked me if I ever forgave them. I think about that often. Forgiveness isn't something you give like a gift wrapped in ribbon. It's not a bow you place on a wound and hope it stops bleeding. It's something you stop carrying. I let it go. Not for them, for me. Now, when I walk the halls of the Institute, the sound of drills, quiet conversation, sea breeze slipping through the windows, I feel light. Walter's pen stays in my pocket, singed from the mansion fire, but it still writes, still signs, still draws, not to erase what came before, but to prove something stronger can follow it. Opening day arrived. We didn't do anything flashy, no stage lights or orchestras, just a gathering of students, builders, mentors, real people, not stockholders. I stood on the atrium stage, looking out at the faces in front of me, and for a second, my mind flicked back to the graduation stage years ago. Same silence, different reason. Back then, it was silence because no one clapped for me. Now it was silence because they were waiting to listen. I took a breath. When I was young, I began, I thought family was something you were born into. Turns out, it's something you build, if you have the courage to start over. The room rose in applause, real, unrehearsed, human. And this time, I didn't flinch. After the ceremony, I stepped down, loosened my tie, and walked toward the edge of the hall. The sunlight poured across the bronze chair by the window. I stood there for a moment, eyes half closed, just listening to the waves in the distance. It took losing everything, I whispered, to finally feel like I belonged. The chair sat still in the golden light, and I knew the rebuild was never about bricks or glass or names. It was about finally building something that didn't need to be torn down.